The sound of shattering glass pierced the tranquil evening air in Lewiston, Montana Territory, 1875, as Delilah Hayes tumbled backward into a stack of crates behind the general store. Blood trickled from her split lip, mixing with the dirt and tears streaking her face. Her assailant, Nathaniel Graves, the wealthy cattle baron's son who believed his father's money entitled him to whatever and whomever he wanted, towered over her with clenched fists and fury in his eyes. "No woman refuses me," he snarled, reaching down to grab her arm. "Especially not some orphaned seamstress with nothing to her name but a needle and thread." Delilah's fingers scrambled in the dirt, finding a jagged stone. "I said no," she said through gritted teeth, her voice stronger than she felt. "And I meant it." When Nathaniel lunged for her again, she swung the stone, missing his face but grazing his shoulder. His expression twisted from shock to rage as he drew back his hand for another blow. "That's enough." The voice cut through the darkness like a knife, low, steady, and carrying the unmistakable promise of violence. Owen Xavier stepped from the shadows, his tall frame silhouetted against the distant lantern light of Main Street. Dust coated his leather vest and denim pants, evidence of the long trail he'd ridden that day. The silver star pinned to his chest caught the moonlight as he moved forward, one hand resting casually on the Colt revolver at his hip. "Marshal Xavier," Nathaniel stammered, immediately releasing Delilah and stepping back. "This ain't what it looks like." "The girl and I were just having a disagreement. Seems like a mighty one-sided disagreement from where I'm standing," Owen replied, his eyes never leaving Nathaniel's face even as he extended his other hand toward Delilah. "Miss, are you all right?" Delilah hesitated before accepting his hand, wincing as she rose to her feet. "I'll survive, Marshal." Her voice was barely audible, but there was steel beneath the softness. "Graves, you're going to walk away now," Owen said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And if I ever catch you laying hands on any woman in my jurisdiction again, your father's money won't save you from spending time in my jail. Do we understand each other?" Nathaniel's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly before backing away. "This isn't over," he muttered, his eyes fixed on Delilah with a promise of retribution before he turned and disappeared into the night. Owen turned his full attention to Delilah, taking in her torn sleeve, the bruise forming beneath her eye, and the quiet dignity with which she stood despite it all. "Miss Hayes, isn't it? You work at the dress shop with Mrs. Patterson," Delilah nodded, surprised he knew who she was. "Yes, Marshal." "Let me walk you home," he said, his voice gentler now. As they began walking toward the modest boarding house where she rented a room, he added quietly, "What happened back there, it won't happen again. Not while I'm wearing this badge. You have my word on that." Looking into his eyes, Delilah saw something that had become foreign to her in the 3 years since her parents died of fever-genuine concern. She didn't know then how deeply those words would bind their fates together, or how desperately that promise would be tested in the months ahead. As dawn broke over Lewiston the following morning, Delilah's fingers trembled slightly as she attempted to thread her needle. The swelling around her eye had subsided somewhat, but the purple-blue bruise remained stark against her fair skin. She had done her best to conceal it with a dusting of powder, but Mrs. Patterson's sharp eyes missed nothing. "Land sakes, child, what happened to your face?" the older woman exclaimed, bustling over to examine Delilah more closely. "It's nothing, Mrs. Patterson. I tripped in the dark last night," Delilah replied, the lie sitting uncomfortably on her tongue. Edith Patterson, a widow of 65 who had run Lewiston's only dress shop for nearly 20 years, narrowed her eyes skeptically. Funny how a trip gave you marks that look like fingers." She sighed heavily. It was that Graves boy, wasn't it? I've seen the way he looks at you when he comes in with his mother. Delilah concentrated on her stitching, unable to meet the older woman's concerned gaze. Please, I don't want any trouble. His father practically owns half the businesses in town. That may be so, but no amount of money gives a man the right to treat a woman like that, Mrs. Patterson declared firmly. You should tell Marshal Xavier. He already knows, Delilah admitted softly. He intervened last night. Mrs. Patterson's expression softened. Good. Owen Xavier is one of the few men in this territory with both the backbone and the moral compass to stand up to the likes of Gerald Graves and his spoiled son. She patted Delilah's shoulder gently. You focus on finishing Mrs. Calloway's wedding dress today. I'll mind the front of the shop. As Delilah worked, her mind kept returning to the marshal. She had seen him around town since his arrival 6 months ago. Of course, Lewiston wasn't large enough for anyone to remain a stranger for long, but their paths had rarely crossed. She knew little about him beyond the basic facts. He had come from somewhere back east, was in his early 30s, and had quickly earned a reputation for fair but firm enforcement of the law. Unlike his predecessor, who had been firmly in Gerald Graves' pocket, Owen Xavier showed no signs of being bought. The little bell above the shop door jingled, pulling Delilah from her thoughts. She heard Mrs. Patterson's warm greeting, followed by a deeper voice that made her fingers still on the delicate lace she was attaching to the wedding gown. Good morning, Mrs. Patterson. I was hoping to have a word with Miss Hayes if she's available. Of course, Marshal. She's in the back room working on the Calloway girl's dress. Go right on through. Delilah quickly smoothed her apron and tucked a stray auburn curl back into her simple bun as Owen Xavier's tall frame filled the doorway to the workroom. Miss Hayes, he said, removing his hat. I hope I'm not interrupting your work. Not at all, Marshal, she replied, setting aside the gown. What can I do for you? I wanted to make sure you were all right after last night, he said, his eyes taking in the bruise that her powder hadn't quite concealed. A muscle in his jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. And to let you know that I've had a conversation with Gerald Graves this morning about his son's behavior. Delilah's eyes widened with alarm. You didn't. Mr. Graves will. Mr. Graves may own a lot of land and businesses around here, but he doesn't own the law, Owen interrupted firmly. I made it clear that his son's actions were unacceptable and would not be tolerated, regardless of the family name. He'll make trouble for you, Delilah said softly. The previous marshal was more interested in keeping his job than doing it, Owen finished for her. I'm not. There was something in his steady gaze that made Delilah believe him, despite her experiences teaching her that men with power rarely faced consequences for their actions or those of their sons. There's something else, Owen continued, taking a step closer and lowering his voice. Nathaniel Graves has a history of this kind of behavior. 2 years ago, a young woman who worked at the Graves ranch disappeared after reportedly rejecting his advances. Her family was paid to leave town and keep quiet. There was another incident with a waitress at the hotel restaurant last year. Delilah felt a chill run through her. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to be careful, he said gravely. And because I need your help. If Nathaniel has harassed or attacked other women in town, they might be willing to speak to you when they wouldn't to me. With more witnesses willing to come forward, we could build a case that even Gerald Graves' money couldn't bury. You're asking me to help you bring charges against the most powerful family in the county, Delilah asked incredulously. I'm just a seamstress, Marshal Xavier. I have no family, no connections, no protection except what little my meager wages can provide. You have me, Owen said simply. My protection and my word that I won't let anything happen to you, What Nathaniel did to you last night, it wasn't right. And I suspect you're not the first, nor would you be the last if he's not stopped." Delilah studied him, searching for any sign that this was merely empty talk from yet another man making promises he had no intention of keeping. She had learned to be wary after her parents' death had left her alone in a world that showed little kindness to women without means or male protection. But there was something in Owen Xavier's direct gaze that spoke of integrity. "I'll think about it," she finally said. "That's all I can promise for now." Owen nodded, seeming to understand that even this small concession had cost her. "That's fair. Thank you for hearing me out." He placed his hat back on his head and turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. "Miss Hayes." "Yes, Marshal." "I meant what I said last night. It won't happen again. Not to you, not while I'm here." The quiet conviction in his voice sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. After he left, Delilah returned to the wedding dress, her fingers working automatically while her mind wrestled with the marshal's request. Speaking out against Nathaniel Graves could cost her everything: her job if Gerald Graves pressured enough businesses, her reputation if Nathaniel spread lies about her character, perhaps even her safety if the family decided to make an example of her. Yet remaining silent meant other women might suffer as she had, or worse. And there was something compelling about Owen Xavier's determination to uphold justice regardless of wealth or status that made her want to believe that change was possible, even in a frontier town where money and violence often trumped law and decency. By the time she finished attaching the final pearl button to the wedding dress, Delilah had made her decision. She would help the marshal cautiously, carefully, but she would help. Some risks, she decided, were worth taking. That evening, as Delilah was locking up the shop after Mrs. Patterson had gone home, a familiar figure emerged from the shadows across the street. Her heart lurched as Nathaniel Graves sauntered toward her, flanked by two ranch hands who worked for his father. "Evening, Miss Hayes," he called, his voice carrying a false pleasantness that did nothing to mask the menace beneath. "Seems we have some unfinished business to discuss." Delilah's fingers tightened around the shop key as she quickly assessed her options. The marshal's office was at the far end of Main Street, too far to run. The boarding house was closer, but she'd have to pass Nathaniel to reach it. "I have nothing to discuss with you, Mr. Graves," she replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Please excuse me." As she attempted to walk past them, one of the ranch hands stepped into her path while the other moved to block her from behind. Nathaniel approached, his eyes glittering with malice. "You made a mistake getting the marshal involved in our private affairs," he said, reaching out to stroke her cheek with one finger. She flinched away from his touch. "My father may tolerate Xavier's self-righteousness for now, but make no mistake, men like him don't last long out here unless they learn to be reasonable. And men like you believe you can take whatever you want without consequence," Delilah retorted, anger momentarily overwhelming her fear. Nathaniel's expression darkened. "I came to offer you a chance to make amends. Tell the marshal you were mistaken about last night, that you fell, just like you told old Lady Patterson." "How did you?" "This is a small town, Delilah. People talk." His smile was cold. "So what will it be?" "A simple misunderstanding between us that we can put behind us. Or do you want to see what happens to troublesome women in Lewiston?" Before Delilah could answer, the distinctive sound of a rifle being cocked cut through the evening air. "Step away from the lady," came Owen Xavier's calm command from behind them. "All three of you." The ranch hands exchanged nervous glances, but Nathaniel merely turned with an arrogant smile. "Marshal, we were just having a friendly conversation with Miss Hayes." "Three men surrounding one woman after dark doesn't look friendly from where I'm standing," Owen replied, the Winchester rifle in his hands pointed steadily at Nathaniel's chest. "Miss Hayes, please come over here." Delilah didn't need to be told twice. She quickly moved around the stunned ranch hands to stand behind the marshal. "Nathaniel, I'm beginning to think you didn't take our conversation this morning seriously." Owen continued, his voice level but threaded with steel. "So let me be clearer. If I see you within 20 feet of Miss Hayes again, I won't bother with warnings or jail. Is that understood?" For a moment, Nathaniel's face contorted with rage before he mastered himself. "Perfectly, Marshal, but you should understand something too. My father's patience with your enthusiasm for the law has limits. Men who cross the Graves family tend to have short careers in Montana territory. Some have even shorter lives." "Is that a threat, Mr. Graves? Just a historical observation?" Nathaniel nodded to his companions. "Come on, boys. The lady clearly isn't in the mood for company tonight." As they walked away, Delilah released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "How did you know?" "Mrs. Patterson stopped by my office before she went home. Said she was worried about you closing up alone after what happened last night." Owen lowered the rifle, his eyes still tracking Nathaniel and his men until they disappeared around a corner. "She was right to be concerned." "Thank you," Delilah said softly. "That's twice now you've intervened on my behalf." "Just doing my job, Miss Hayes." Owen offered his arm. "May I walk you home? I'd feel better knowing you arrived safely." As they walked through the quiet streets, Owen explained that he'd been raised by a sheriff father in Pennsylvania who had taught him that the law applied equally to everyone, regardless of wealth or status. He'd come west after the war, serving as a deputy in Colorado before accepting the marshal position in Lewiston. "What about you?" he asked. "Mrs. Patterson mentioned you're on your own." "My parents moved us here from St. Louis when I was 16, Delilah explained. "Father was a carpenter, mother a seamstress who taught me the trade. They both died of fever 3 years ago within weeks of each other. Mrs. Patterson took me on as an apprentice, then as her assistant." She paused. "I've managed, but it's difficult sometimes being a woman alone out here." Owen nodded thoughtfully. "I've noticed that the territories can be especially hard on women without family protection. The law exists, but it's often unevenly applied. Which is why what you're doing standing up to the Graves family is both admirable and dangerous," Delilah said as they reached the boarding house. "I've thought about your request, Marshal Xavier. And I'll help you," she said firmly. "I know at least 2 other women who have had encounters with Nathaniel. They might speak to me where they wouldn't to you." Relief and something warmer flickered in Owen's eyes. "Thank you. But after tonight, I'm even more concerned about your safety. Nathaniel clearly isn't used to being denied or held accountable." "What do you suggest?" "For now, don't go anywhere alone, especially after dark. I'll speak to Mrs. Patterson about ensuring someone walks with you to and from the shop." He hesitated. "And perhaps it would be best if we weren't seen speaking privately too often. Nathaniel already sees you as a threat. If he believes we're working together, it could make you even more of a target." Delilah nodded, understanding the logic but feeling a surprising disappointment at the prospect of limited contact with the marshal. There was something about his steady presence that made her feel secure for the first time in years. "Good night, Marshal Xavier," she said, extending her hand. He took it, his larger hand engulfing hers with a gentle firmness. "Good night, Miss Hayes. Remember, you're not alone in this." As Delilah watched him walk away, she wondered if she had just made the bravest decision of her life or the most foolish. Over the next 2 weeks, Delilah cautiously approached women she suspected might have had encounters with Nathaniel Graves. She started with Sarah Jenkins, a laundress at the hotel who had abruptly changed positions from waitress to laundry worker last year right around the time Owen had mentioned an incident at the hotel restaurant. "I can't talk about it," Sarah whispered when Delilah finally cornered her alone behind the hotel where linens were hung to dry. "If Mr. Graves found out—" "I understand your fear," Delilah said gently. "Truly, I do. He attacked me too, Sarah." Marshal Xavier intervened, but not before Nathaniel made it clear he believes he can do whatever he wants to women like us. Sarah's hand stilled on the sheet she was hanging. "The Marshal, he's really investigating Nathaniel." "Yes, but he needs witnesses willing to come forward." Sarah glanced around nervously before pulling up her sleeve to reveal a jagged scar running from wrist to elbow. "He did this when I refused to meet him in the storage room after my shift. Said if I told anyone, he'd do worse next time. His father paid the doctor to say I'd had an accident with a broken glass." Delilah felt sick. "Would you be willing to tell Marshal Xavier what happened?" After a long pause, Sarah nodded. If others are speaking up too, not just me alone." By the end of the week, Delilah had spoken with 4 women who had suffered at Nathaniel's hands. 2 agreed to speak with Owen, 1 refused outright, and 1 remained undecided. It wasn't as many as Delilah had hoped for, but it was a start. She arranged to meet Owen at the church on Sunday after services, when their conversation wouldn't draw undue attention among the many social gatherings that took place on the church grounds. As they walked among the gravestones, ostensibly so Delilah could visit her parents' resting place, she relayed what she had learned. 3 witnesses, including yourself," Owen said thoughtfully. "It's a start. If we can get statements from all of you, I might be able to convince the circuit judge to bring charges when he comes through next month." "And until then?" Delilah asked, arranging a small bouquet of wildflowers on her mother's grave. "Until then, we gather more evidence and I keep a close eye on Nathaniel," Owen replied. He hesitated before adding, "There's something else you should know. Gerald Graves came to see me yesterday. Offered to double my salary if I'd focus on real criminals instead of youthful indiscretions by his son." Delilah's head snapped up. "What did you tell him?" "That I wasn't for sale," Owen said simply. "He didn't take it well." "I imagine not," Delilah murmured. "The Graves family isn't used to hearing no." Owen's expression grew serious. "Delilah, Miss Hayes, I want you to consider something. The women you've spoken to, they've all suffered for crossing Nathaniel. What you're doing is brave, but it puts you at considerable risk. No one would think less of you if you decided to step back from this." Delilah looked up at him, noting the concern in his eyes that went beyond professional duty. "Would you step back, Marshal Xavier? If someone told you it was dangerous to uphold the law?" A small smile curved his lips. "No, I suppose I wouldn't." "Then please don't ask me to abandon what I know is right," she said quietly. "Those women trusted me with their stories. I won't let them down." Something shifted in Owen's expression. As he looked at her, respect mingled with something warmer that made Delilah's heart beat a little faster. "You're a remarkable woman, Delilah Hayes." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected shiver through her that had nothing to do with fear. "As you're a remarkable man, Owen Xavier," she replied, testing his name on her tongue. For a moment, they stood looking at each other, the air between them charged with something neither was ready to name. Then Owen cleared his throat and stepped back slightly. "I should get back to my rounds," he said. "Thank you for your help with this, Miss Hayes. I'll be in touch about getting formal statements from the women who are willing to testify." Delilah nodded, suddenly aware of Mrs. Calloway watching them curiously from several plots away. "Of course, Marshal. Good day." As she walked back toward town, Delilah found herself thinking not of Nathaniel Graves and the case against him, but of the way Owen's eyes had lingered on hers, and the unexpected flutter in her chest when he'd said her name. The following Wednesday, Delilah was pinning a hem for Mrs. Hollister when the shop bell jingled. She looked up to see Clara Graves, Nathaniel's mother and one of the shop's most prestigious clients, entering with her usual imperious manner. "Mrs. Graves," Mrs. Patterson greeted her with professional politeness. "What can we do for you today?" "I need to speak with Miss Hayes," Clara replied, her cold gaze fixing on Delilah. "Privately." Mrs. Patterson frowned. "Miss Hayes is in the middle of an important fitting for Mrs. Hollister. Perhaps I can assist you." "It will only take a moment," Clara insisted, her tone making it clear she wasn't accustomed to being refused. "And it's a matter of some urgency." Delilah carefully removed the pins from Mrs. Hollister's hem. "It's all right, Mrs. Patterson. I can spare a few minutes." To Mrs. Hollister, she added, "Please excuse me. I'll return shortly to finish your fitting." Mrs. Patterson indicated her small office at the rear of the shop. "You may use my office for privacy." Once the door closed behind them, Clara Graves wasted no time on pleasantries. "I understand you've been spreading vicious lies about my son," she said, her voice like ice. Delilah straightened her spine. "I've told no lies about Nathaniel, Mrs. Graves. You've been asking questions around town, encouraging other women to make false accusations against him, attempting to smear our family name." Clara's perfectly arranged features tightened with anger. "It stops now." "Or what?" Delilah asked quietly. Clara smiled thinly. "You're an intelligent young woman, Miss Hayes. You must realize your position in this town is precarious. No family, no husband, dependent on the goodwill of an aging widow for your livelihood." She opened her reticule and withdrew an envelope. "Inside is enough money to take you anywhere you'd like to go, St. Louis perhaps, where you have history. Or Denver, where a skilled seamstress might establish herself quite nicely." Delilah stared at the envelope but made no move to take it. "You're bribing me to leave town." "I'm offering you an opportunity," Clara corrected. "Far more generous than most in your position would receive. The alternative is to stay and watch as your reputation is systematically destroyed. Do you think anyone in Lewiston will bring their business to a shop that employs a woman known for making false accusations against respectable men? Do you think Mrs. Patterson can afford to keep you on when her customers go elsewhere?" Delilah felt cold dread settling in her stomach, but kept her voice steady. "Nathaniel attacked me, Mrs. Graves, and he's attacked other women in this town. Those aren't lies or accusations, they're facts." Clara's expression hardened. "My son is a Graves. His grandfather helped build this territory when it was nothing but wilderness and Indians. Our family provides employment to half the county. Whatever misunderstandings may have occurred between Nathaniel and certain women of questionable virtue, they hardly warrant the witch hunt you and that self-righteous Marshal are conducting." "Questionable virtue," Delilah repeated, anger flaring. "Is that how you justify your son's behavior? By blaming the women he hurts?" "Enough," Clara snapped, setting the envelope on Mrs. Patterson's desk. "You have until Sunday to make your decision. Take the money and leave Lewiston, or stay and face the consequences. I won't make this offer again." After she left, Delilah sank into Mrs. Patterson's chair, her hands trembling slightly. The envelope seemed to mock her from the desk, an easy escape from the gathering storm, but at the cost of her principles and the justice the other women deserved. When she finally returned to Mrs. Hollister's fitting, the woman regarded her with barely concealed curiosity. "Everything all right, dear? You look a bit pale." "Just a small matter to resolve," Delilah replied, forcing a smile as she resumed pinning the hem. "By closing time, Mrs. Hollister's loose tongue had already spread word throughout town that Clara Graves had had a private meeting with Delilah Hayes, and speculation was running wild about what it might mean. Delilah could feel the curious stares as she walked to the boarding house, and for the first time, she began to truly understand the Graves family's power in Lewiston, not just their money or land, but their ability to control the town's narrative and turn public opinion with a whisper. She needed to speak with Owen, but their agreement to limit contact made that difficult without drawing more attention. As she reached the boarding house, however, she spotted his tall figure waiting in the shadows of the porch. "Marshal," she greeted him formally, aware of Mrs. Simmons, the boarding house owner, watching through the front window. "Miss Hayes," he replied with a tip of his hat. "Sorry to bother you, but there's been a development in that matter we discussed." "Perhaps we could speak inside," Delilah suggested. "Mrs. Simmons allows visitors in the parlor until 8 o'clock. Once they were seated in the boarding house parlor with Mrs. Simmons pointedly arranging flowers within earshot, Delilah quietly recounted her conversation with Clara Graves. Owen's expression darkened as she spoke, the muscle in his jaw tightening. "So they're trying to buy you off or run you out of town," he said, keeping his voice low. "I'm not surprised, but I am concerned. The Graves family rarely makes empty threats. What should I do?" Delilah asked, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Owen leaned forward slightly. "What do you want to do?" Delilah thought for a moment, considering the money in the envelope enough to start fresh somewhere else, away from Nathaniel's threats and the Graves family's influence. It was tempting, especially knowing what might await her if she stayed. "I want to stay and see this through," she finally said. "Those women deserve justice, and if I leave, they'll have even less reason to come forward." Relief and admiration flickered in Owen's eyes. "I had a feeling you'd say that." He hesitated before adding, "But I need to be honest with you. The Graves family's reach extends beyond Lewiston. Gerald Graves has friends on the territorial council. He's already sent telegrams to Helena questioning my competence and suggesting I'm pursuing a personal vendetta against his family." "Can they have you removed?" Delilah asked, alarmed. "Possibly. But more concerning is that the circuit judge who'd hear any case against Nathaniel is an old friend of Gerald's. Even with multiple witnesses, getting a conviction won't be easy." Delilah felt her spirit sink. "So even if we gather all the evidence, justice might still elude us because of who they are." Owen's expression hardened with determination. "I didn't say that. I said it won't be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever is." He reached across the small table between them, briefly covering her hand with his. "We'll find a way, Delilah. I promise you that." The warmth of his touch and the conviction in his voice restored some of her courage. As their eyes met, Delilah felt that same flutter in her chest, a dangerous distraction given their circumstances, but one she couldn't quite bring herself to regret. "Mrs. Simmons is watching us like a hawk," she murmured, glancing toward the older woman who was now dusting the same shelf for the third time. Owen withdrew his hand, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "Then I should go before she decides I'm compromising your reputation." As he stood to leave, Delilah asked, "When will you take statements from Sarah and the others?" "Tomorrow. The sooner we document everything, the better." He hesitated at the door. "Be careful, Delilah. The Graves family won't stop with one attempt to silence you." After he left, Delilah sat alone in the parlor, contemplating her options. The logical part of her mind said taking Clara's money and leaving town was the safest course, but the thought of abandoning the other women and Owen felt like a betrayal of everything she believed in. As she climbed the stairs to her small room, Delilah made her decision. She would stay and fight, whatever the consequences. Some things she was discovering were worth the risk. The following days brought a subtle but unmistakable shift in how people treated Delilah in town. Several regular customers suddenly found excuses to postpone their fittings. When she entered Hammond's general store for thread, conversations hushed, only to resume in whispers after she passed. Even Mrs. Patterson, who had initially been supportive, began showing signs of nervousness as business noticeably declined. "I don't know what's happening," the older woman fretted as they closed the shop on Friday evening, having had only 2 customers all day. "We've never been this quiet, even in the slowest season." Delilah knew exactly what was happening. The Graves family was flexing its influence, showing her what life would be like if she didn't take Clara's offer and leave town. But she couldn't bring herself to burden Mrs. Patterson with this knowledge. "Perhaps it's just temporary," she suggested. "The harvest is starting and people are busy." Mrs. Patterson looked unconvinced but nodded. "Perhaps." On Saturday morning, Delilah arrived at the shop to find the front window shattered and a crude message painted on the inside wall: "Whores and liars not welcome." Mrs. Patterson stood amid the broken glass, her face ashen. Who would do such a thing? The older woman whispered, her hands trembling as she clutched her shawl around her shoulders. Marshal Xavier arrived moments later, his expression grim as he surveyed the damage. He took statements from both women, though Delilah could tell from his eyes that he knew exactly who was responsible. "This kind of intimidation is a serious crime," he told Mrs. Patterson. "I'll find who did this." "Will you?" Mrs. Patterson asked, an uncharacteristic bitterness in her tone. "Or will it be like the fire at Johnson's newspaper office last year when he printed that article about water rights that upset the Graves ranch? No one was ever charged for that, despite everyone knowing who was behind it." Owen's jaw tightened. "I'm not my predecessor, Mrs. Patterson. I take threats against the citizens of this town seriously, regardless of who makes them." After he left to continue his investigation, Mrs. Patterson turned to Delilah with troubled eyes. "Dear, is there something you're not telling me? First Nathaniel Graves attacks you, then Clara Graves comes for a private meeting, and now this." She gestured to the vandalized shop. "These aren't coincidences." Delilah hesitated, torn between protecting the older woman and being honest with her employer and friend. Finally, she sighed and explained everything: Nathaniel's pattern of attacking women, Owen's investigation, Clara's bribe, and the gathering testimony from other victims. Mrs. Patterson listened in silence, her expression growing increasingly troubled. When Delilah finished, the older woman shook her head slowly. "Oh, my dear, you've placed yourself in the crosshairs of the most powerful family in the territory." She reached for Delilah's hand. "I admire your courage, truly, but this shop is all I have, my livelihood, my home. If the Graves family decides to destroy it to get to you..." The unfinished sentence hung in the air between them. Delilah felt a cold weight settle in her stomach as she realized what Mrs. Patterson was trying to say. "You want me to leave?" she said quietly. "No," Mrs. Patterson replied quickly. "But I need you to understand what's at stake, not just for you, but for me and everyone associated with you." She squeezed Delilah's hand. "Think carefully about whether justice for these women is worth the cost that may be exacted from all of you. Sometimes survival must come before principle." That evening, as Delilah walked home alone, Mrs. Patterson having stayed behind to arrange for the window to be repaired, she felt the weight of impossible choices bearing down on her. If she stayed and continued helping Owen, she risked not only her own safety but Mrs. Patterson's livelihood and the security of the other women who had trusted her with their stories. If she left, Nathaniel would continue hurting women with impunity, protected by his family's power and wealth. Lost in these troubling thoughts, she didn't notice the wagon until it slowed beside her on the darkening street. When she finally looked up, her blood ran cold at the sight of Nathaniel Graves and two unfamiliar men staring down at her. "Evening, Miss Hayes," Nathaniel said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You seem to have missed the message we left for you this morning." Delilah glanced around, realizing with growing alarm that the street was deserted. Most businesses had closed for the day, and the residential area was still a block away. "I have nothing to say to you, Mr. Graves," she replied, quickening her pace. The wagon kept pace with her. "That's unfortunate because I have quite a bit to say to you." Nathaniel gestured to the man holding the reins. "Pull over there, behind the lumber yard." Fear shot through Delilah as the wagon veered off toward the shadowy area behind Thornton's lumber. She broke into a run, heading for the nearest building with lights still showing the telegraph office at the end of the street. "Grab her," Nathaniel ordered, and she heard the sound of boots hitting the ground behind her. Delilah ran faster than she ever had in her life, her lungs burning and her heart pounding. She was 20 yards from the telegraph office when rough hands seized her from behind, one clamping over her mouth to stifle her scream as she was dragged toward the waiting wagon. She fought wildly, kicking and clawing at her attacker, but his grip was like iron. As he lifted her toward the wagon where Nathaniel waited with a length of rope, desperation gave her strength. She bit down hard on the hand covering her mouth, tasting blood as the man cursed and momentarily loosened his hold. "Help!" she screamed as loudly as she could. "Someone help me!" The man backhanded her, sending her sprawling in the dirt. Before she could rise, Nathaniel jumped down from the wagon and grabbed her by the hair. "You just made this much worse for yourself," he snarled, dragging her to her feet. A shot rang out, the bullet kicking up dirt inches from Nathaniel's boot. He froze, his grip on Delilah's hair slackening. "Let her go and put your hands where I can see them, all of you." Owen Xavier's voice cut through the darkness, deadly calm. He emerged from the shadows near the telegraph office, his revolver aimed steadily at Nathaniel. "This doesn't concern you, Marshal," Nathaniel said, though he released Delilah and raised his hand slowly. "Attempting to abduct a citizen of this town very much concerns me," Owen replied, moving closer until he stood between Delilah and the men. "Miss Hayes, are you hurt?" "No," she managed, though her cheek throbbed where she'd been struck. Owen never took his eyes off Nathaniel and his companions. "You three are under arrest for assault and attempted kidnapping. Walk slowly toward the jail. Any sudden moves and I'll assume you're reaching for a weapon." "You're making a mistake, Xavier," Nathaniel said, his voice cold with fury. Your father can't help you tonight," Owen interrupted. "Now move." As the three men reluctantly began walking toward the jail at the end of Main Street, Owen finally glanced at Delilah. "Can you walk?" She nodded, still shaken but determined not to show weakness. "Yes, I'm coming with you. I need to get these men locked up first, then I'll take your statement." His eyes softened slightly. "You're safe now, Delilah, I promise." At the jail, Owen efficiently disarmed and locked the three men in separate cells before turning his full attention to Delilah. As she recounted what had happened, he cleaned the small cut on her cheek with gentle hands. "They meant to take you somewhere isolated," he said grimly when she finished. "Likely to hurt you badly enough that you'd either leave town or be too frightened to continue helping with the investigation. Or to kill me," Delilah said quietly, voicing the fear that had been growing since she'd seen the hatred in Nathaniel's eyes. "They don't seem concerned about consequences anymore." Owen's expression darkened. "I won't let that happen." He set aside the cloth he'd been using to clean her wound and crouched before her chair, taking both her hands in his. "Delilah, I think it's time we consider getting you somewhere safe until the circuit judge arrives. I have a friend who runs a ranch about 20 miles north of here. You could stay there where Nathaniel and his father couldn't find you, and the other women who have agreed to testify." "What about them? I'll arrange protection for them too, if necessary." He squeezed her hands gently. "The most important thing is keeping all of you alive to testify." "And what about you?" Delilah asked, suddenly realizing the danger he was in. "Gerald Graves won't take his son's arrest lightly. He'll come after your badge or worse." A small, grim smile touched Owen's lips. "Let him try. I've dealt with men like Gerald Graves before. They believe their money makes them untouchable above the law. It's time someone showed him otherwise." Looking into his determined eyes, Delilah felt something shift inside her admiration, deepening into an emotion she wasn't quite ready to name. This man was risking everything, his position, possibly his life, to stand for justice when it would have been far easier to look the other way as his predecessor had done. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. "Most lawmen in your position would have taken Gerald's money or ignored Nathaniel's behavior. Why fight so hard for women most people in town barely notice?" Owen was quiet for a moment, his thumb absently tracing circles on the back of her hand. "When I was 16, my father was sheriff of a small town in Pennsylvania. There was a wealthy mill owner there, not unlike Gerald Graves, who believed his position entitled him to special treatment. His son assaulted a young woman who worked at their household. When she came to my father for help, he took her statement and arrested the son." He paused, a shadow crossing his face. "3 days later, my father was shot in the back while making his rounds. The shooter was never identified, but everyone knew who had ordered it. The mill owner's son was never charged. The witnesses suddenly couldn't remember what they'd seen, and the girl herself disappeared. My mother took me and moved us to her sister's home in Ohio shortly after." "I'm so sorry," Delilah whispered. "I swore then that if I ever wore a badge, I'd never be bought or intimidated into looking the other way." His eyes met hers with quiet intensity. "Every person deserves equal protection under the law, Delilah. That's not just some ideal, it's the foundation of civilization. Without it, we're no better than animals fighting for dominance." In that moment, with his hands holding hers and conviction burning in his eyes, Delilah realized she had never met a man like Owen Xavier, and never would again. The feeling that bloomed in her chest was no longer something she could deny or mistake for mere gratitude. "I'll go to your friend's ranch," she said finally, "but I'm coming back to testify, whatever happens. We'll face this together." Something like relief mixed with another emotion flickered in Owen's eyes. "Together," he agreed softly. The sound of angry voices outside the jail interrupted the moment. Owen quickly rose and moved to the window. "Gerald Graves," he said grimly, "and it looks like he's gathered quite a crowd." The door burst open, and Gerald Graves strode in, his imposing frame filling the doorway. Behind him, at least 20 men crowded the street: ranch hands, business owners, and others whose livelihoods depended on the Graves family's goodwill. "Xavier," Gerald growled, his eyes flicking briefly to Delilah before settling on the marshal. "I understand you've arrested my son on some fabricated charge." "Attempted kidnapping and assault aren't fabricated charges, Graves," Owen replied evenly. "I caught him and his friends in the act of dragging Miss Hayes into a wagon against her will." Gerald's face reddened. "A misunderstanding, obviously. The young lady has been spreading vicious lies about my son. Perhaps he acted impulsively in confronting her, but he hit me and tried to force me into a wagon," Delilah interrupted, rising to her feet. "That's not a misunderstanding. It's a crime." Gerald turned cold eyes on her. "You should have taken my wife's generous offer, Miss Hayes. Now you'll get nothing but the consequences of your slander." "Threatening a witness is another crime, Graves," Owen said, his hand moving to rest on his holstered revolver. "One I'd be happy to add to the charges against your family." Gerald smiled thinly. "No threats, Marshal. Merely an observation about the natural consequences of false accusations." He gestured to the men behind him. "I've brought several of Lewiston's most respected citizens with me. They're prepared to post any reasonable bail for my son and his employees." "There won't be any bail tonight," Owen replied. "Your son stays in my jail until the judge arrives next week to hear the charges, all of them, including the previous assaults on other women in this town." A dangerous silence fell. Gerald's expression hardened as he realized Owen wouldn't be intimidated or bought. "You're making a serious mistake, Xavier," he said quietly. "One that will have far-reaching consequences for you and anyone who stands with you." His gaze shifted meaningfully to Delilah. "Consider carefully whether this crusade of yours is worth the price you'll pay." "Is that how you justify what your son has done?" Delilah asked, unable to remain silent in the face of such blatant intimidation. "By threatening anyone who dares speak the truth about him." Gerald regarded her with cold contempt. "You're nothing but a seamstress with delusions of importance, Miss Hayes. When this is over, you'll find there's no place for you in Lewiston or any other decent town in this territory." "That's enough," Owen said sharply. "You've said your piece, Graves. Now take your men and leave my jail, or I'll have deputies from the neighboring counties here by morning to help me lock up every last one of you for interfering with the law." For a tense moment, it seemed Gerald might challenge Owen's authority further. Then, with a curt nod, he turned to leave. At the door, he paused to deliver a final warning. "This isn't over, Xavier. Not by a long shot." After Gerald and his followers departed, Owen immediately began making arrangements for Delilah's safety. He sent a telegram to his friend Jacob Carson at the North Star Ranch, explaining the situation and requesting temporary sanctuary for Delilah and potentially other witnesses. "I'll take you there myself first thing in the morning," he told her as he locked the jail's front door. "Tonight, you'll stay here where I can protect you. There's a cot in my office you can use." "What about the other women?" Delilah asked worriedly. "Sarah and Mary could be in danger too if Gerald decides to silence all potential witnesses." "I'll send my deputy to check on them and offer protection." Owen's expression was grim. "But first I need to make sure you're safe. You're the primary witness and the one they've already tried to harm." As Delilah settled onto the narrow cot in Owen's office, exhaustion from the day's events washed over her. Despite the circumstances, she felt safer than she had in weeks, knowing Owen was just outside the door, standing guard. The last thought she had before drifting into sleep was that somehow, in the midst of all this danger and uncertainty, she had found something unexpected, not just an ally, but a man whose principles and courage made her own heart feel lighter, braver, more alive. Morning came with the sound of horses and wagon wheels outside the jail. Delilah awoke to find Owen already dressed and checking his revolver. "Jacob sent 2 of his ranch hands with a wagon," he explained. "They'll take you to North Star while I stay here to maintain order and protect the other witnesses." A knot of disappointment formed in Delilah's chest at the thought of being separated from Owen, even though she understood the necessity. "How long will I need to stay there?" "Just until the circuit judge arrives, about a week." Owen holstered his weapon and moved closer, his expression softening. "Jacob and his wife Emma are good people. You'll be safe with them. "And you?" she asked, unable to keep the concern from her voice. "Gerald Graves isn't going to simply accept his son remaining in jail. I've telegraphed the federal marshal's office in Helena. They're sending 2 deputies to assist me." He smiled slightly. Contrary to what Gerald believes, the law still holds more authority than his money, at least when properly enforced. Before Delilah could respond, a sharp rap sounded at the door. Owen moved to answer it, his hand resting on his revolver until he confirmed it was indeed Jacob's men. The journey to North Star Ranch took most of the day, following remote trails rather than the main road to avoid any potential ambush by Graves' men. Delilah had never ventured this far from Lewiston since arriving with her parents years ago, and despite the circumstances, she found herself marveling at the rugged beauty of the Montana wilderness, sprawling meadows bursting with summer wildflowers, forests of pine and aspen, and in the distance, the blue-gray peaks of mountains piercing the sky. Jacob and Emma Carson welcomed her warmly to their ranch house, a sturdy 2-story structure surrounded by outbuildings, corrals, and well-tended fields. Emma, a practical woman in her 40s with kind eyes and capable hands, showed Delilah to a comfortable bedroom on the 2nd floor. "Owen explained your situation," she said, helping Delilah settle in. "Terrible business, but you're safe here. No one approaches North Star without us knowing well in advance." "Thank you for taking me in," Delilah replied sincerely. "I know it puts you at risk as well." Emma waved away her concern. "Jacob and Owen go back to their days as deputies in Colorado. If Owen says you need protection, that's good enough for us." She paused, studying Delilah with shrewd eyes. "Besides, it's about time someone stood up to the Graves family. They've been throwing their weight around the territory for too long." Over the next few days, Delilah found unexpected peace at North Star Ranch. The rhythm of ranch life, early mornings, shared meals, and practical work was soothing after the tension and fear that had dominated her recent existence. Emma put her to work helping with household tasks, which Delilah welcomed as a way to repay their hospitality and keep her mind from constantly worrying about Owen and the other women back in Lewiston. On the 4th day, Jacob returned from a supply run to the nearest town with news. "Word spreading throughout the territory about Owen's stand against the Graves family," he reported over dinner. "Some say Gerald has hired gunmen from as far as Wyoming to handle the situation before the circuit judge arrives." Delilah's fork clattered against her plate. "He's bringing in hired guns. Owen could be killed," Jacob nodded grimly. "It's possible, but Owen's no fool, and those federal deputies should have arrived by now." He exchanged a look with Emma. "Still, I'm riding back to Lewiston tomorrow to see if he needs additional help. Some of our hands have offered to go with me." "I'm coming too," Delilah said firmly. "If there's going to be trouble, my testimony is even more important. I won't hide here while others risk their lives." "Owen sent you here to keep you safe," Emma objected. "He'd never forgive us if we brought you back into danger." "The danger was always there," Delilah replied. "And it won't end unless Nathaniel is brought to justice. The other women are still in Lewiston, still at risk. I can't abandon them or Owen now." After much discussion, Jacob reluctantly agreed that Delilah could return with him and his men, on the condition that she would remain hidden at the local church under the protection of Pastor Miller, until it was time to give her testimony to the judge. They departed at dawn the next morning, 6 armed ranch hands accompanying Jacob and Delilah. The tension grew as they approached Lewiston, especially when they began encountering other travelers who confirmed rumors of trouble brewing in town. "Graves has men positioned throughout Lewiston," a freight driver informed them when they stopped to water the horses. Word is they're waiting for the judge to arrive tomorrow before making their move, planning to demonstrate the town's support for the Graves family and opposition to the Marshal's persecution of them. As they crested the final hill overlooking Lewiston, Delilah felt her heart constrict at the sight of the town that had been her home for 7 years. It looked peaceful from a distance, giving no indication of the power struggle unfolding within its streets. Jacob directed his men to approach from the north, avoiding the main road into town. They left their horses at a friendly rancher's property and proceeded on foot, keeping to the cover of trees and outbuildings as they made their way to the church. Pastor Miller, a courageous man who had often spoken out against injustice despite threats to his position, welcomed them into the church basement. "Marshal Xavier said you might return," he told Delilah. "He's been checking on me daily to ensure the church remains secure as a potential refuge." "How is he?" Delilah asked anxiously. "Determined," the pastor replied. "The federal deputies arrived 3 days ago and they've been patrolling the town in shifts. Nathaniel remains in jail despite multiple attempts by his father to secure his release through legal and less legal means. And the other women, Sarah and Mary, safe for now. The marshal has them staying together at the hotel under deputy protection." Pastor Miller's expression grew somber, but the situation is deteriorating. "Gerald Graves has brought in at least a dozen hired guns, and they've been making their presence known around town. Many businesses have closed out of fear of violence. Those that remain open have largely declared their support for the Graves family." Jacob's expression hardened. "Sounds like we arrived just in time. Where can I find Owen?" He's been operating out of the jail, maintaining a visible presence to deter any immediate action against his prisoners. The pastor hesitated. "But he's been asking about you, Miss Hayes." "I believe he's concerned about your safety and well-being." Delilah felt warmth spread through her chest despite the gravity of the situation. "I need to let him know I've returned." "Too dangerous for you to move through town now," Jacob objected. "I'll go to him and bring him here after dark." The hours of waiting that followed were among the longest of Delilah's life. She paced the church basement, alternating between prayer and planning what she would say when Owen arrived if he arrived. As dusk fell, Pastor Miller brought her a simple meal and news that the circuit judge was expected to reach Lewiston by noon the following day. "The timing works in our favor," he said. "Gerald Graves can't risk open violence with a federal judge about to arrive. It would undermine his claims that this is all a misunderstanding or persecution." Just after midnight, the basement door opened to reveal Jacob and, behind him, Owen. Delilah's heart leapt at the sight of him, though she noted with concern the dark circles under his eyes and the new tension in his bearing. "You shouldn't have come back," were his first words, though the relief in his eyes belied their sternness. "It's not safe here." "I couldn't stay away knowing you and the others were in danger," she replied simply. "My testimony is essential to the case against Nathaniel." Owen sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of weary frustration. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met." "I believe the word you're looking for is determined," she countered, a small smile playing at her lips. Despite the gravity of the situation, Owen couldn't help returning her smile. "Determined, then." His expression grew serious again as he turned to include Jacob and Pastor Miller in the conversation. "The judge will arrive tomorrow around noon. I need to get Delilah, Sarah, and Mary to the courthouse safely to give their testimonies before Gerald can interfere." "What's his likely play?" Jacob asked. "Based on the men he's brought in and their positioning around town, I believe he's planning to intimidate the judge and witnesses, make a show of town support for his family, while making it clear that anyone who testifies is risking their future in Lewiston. Owen's jaw tightened. If that fails, they might attempt something more direct to prevent testimony or force the judge to rule in their favor. An ambush on the way to the courthouse, Pastor Miller suggested grimly. Possible, Owen agreed. Which is why we need to move the witnesses under cover of darkness, before dawn. The federal deputies will escort Sarah and Mary. Jacob, I'd like your men to help secure the route and the courthouse itself. And me? Delilah asked. Owen's eyes met hers, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. You'll come with me through the back alleys. We'll approach from the direction they least expect. The plan was set in motion hours before dawn. Delilah, dressed in a simple dark dress borrowed from the pastor's wife, followed Owen through Lewiston's shadowy streets. They moved silently, pausing frequently to listen for any sign they'd been detected. The town seemed unnaturally quiet, as if holding its breath in anticipation of the coming confrontation. As they passed the dress shop, Delilah felt a pang at the sight of the new window glass and the closed sign in the door. She hoped Mrs. Patterson would understand why she had to do this, regardless of the consequences for the business. They reached the courthouse without incident and found Jacob's men already in position, securing the building. Inside, federal deputies were stationed at strategic points, their presence a clear message that the proceedings would be protected by federal authority. The judge should arrive in a few hours, Owen told her as he led her to a small anteroom off the main courtroom. Sarah and Mary are already here. Once everyone is in place, no one enters or leaves until the hearing is complete. As dawn broke over Lewiston, the town began to stir. From the courthouse window, Delilah watched as people gathered in the street outside, some curious onlookers, others clearly Graves supporters. By mid-morning, the crowd had swelled to include nearly the entire town, with Gerald Graves himself holding court near the courthouse steps, surrounded by his hired guns and loyal followers. When the judge's carriage appeared at the end of the street, a hush fell over the crowd. Judge William Harrington, a stern-faced man with a reputation for impartiality, descended from the carriage accompanied by his clerk and 2 additional federal marshals. He acknowledged the crowd with a curt nod, but made no other gesture as he climbed the courthouse steps. Inside, final preparations were made for the hearing. Owen briefed the judge on the case while Delilah waited with Sarah and Mary, all 3 women drawing courage from each other's presence. I'm scared, Sarah admitted, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. What if the judge doesn't believe us? What if Nathaniel goes free and comes after us? Then we'll face that together, Delilah replied, covering Sarah's hands with her own. But I believe in Marshal Xavier and in the truth. We're doing the right thing no matter what happens. At precisely noon, the hearing began. The courtroom was packed, with Gerald Graves and his supporters on one side and a smaller group of townspeople who dared to show support for the proceedings on the other. Nathaniel sat at a table with his lawyer, his expression alternating between arrogant confidence and simmering rage when he caught sight of Delilah and the other women. One by one, they gave their testimonies, Delilah first, then Sarah, then Mary. They spoke of Nathaniel's attacks, the threats that followed, and the culture of fear his family had created in Lewiston. Throughout their testimony, Gerald Graves stared at them with cold hatred, while his supporters muttered and shifted restlessly in their seats. When Owen took the stand to describe catching Nathaniel in the act of attempting to abduct Delilah, the tension in the courtroom reached a breaking point. One of Gerald's hired guns rose to his feet, his hand moving toward his concealed weapon before a federal deputy's warning glance made him reconsider. Nathaniel's lawyer did his best to discredit the women, suggesting they were conspiring against his client out of personal grievances or at the marshal's instigation. But the consistency of their testimonies and the physical evidence, Sarah's scar, Delilah's bruises, and the statements of Dr. Collins, who had treated both women, painted a compelling picture of a young man who believed himself above the law. After 4 hours of testimony, Judge Harrington called a brief recess to consider his ruling. As the courtroom emptied, Owen approached Delilah and the other women. "You were all very brave," he told them, his eyes lingering on Delilah. "Whatever the judge decides, remember that you've done everything you could to see justice served." "What do you think he'll decide?" Mary asked anxiously. Owen hesitated. "Judge Harrington is a fair man, but he's also practical. He knows the Graves family's influence in the territory." The implication was clear. Even with all their testimony, there was no guarantee justice would prevail against such powerful interests. When the judge returned to the courtroom, a heavy silence fell. He surveyed the assembled crowd before speaking, his voice carrying easily to every corner of the room. "This court has heard testimony regarding serious allegations against Nathaniel Graves. After careful consideration of the evidence presented, I find sufficient cause to bind the defendant over for trial on charges of assault, attempted abduction, and intimidation of witnesses." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Shock from the Graves supporters, relief from Delilah and the other women. "The defendant will be remanded to custody pending trial at the territorial court in Helena next month," the judge continued. "Bail is set at $5,000, with the condition that Mr. Graves may not approach or communicate with any of the witnesses in this case, nor remain within the boundaries of Lewiston County while awaiting trial." Gerald Graves rose to his feet, his face flushed with anger. "This is an outrage. My son is being persecuted based on the word of Mr. Graves," the judge interrupted sharply. "You will respect the proceedings of this court or face contempt charges. Your son will receive a fair trial in Helena, where a jury can evaluate all evidence without the particular influences present in this community." As the judge's meaning sank in that he believed Lewiston too dominated by the Graves family for a fair trial, Gerald's expression darkened further. But he said nothing more as his lawyer began arranging for Nathaniel's bail. Outside the courthouse, Owen organized protection for Delilah, Sarah, and Mary as they made their way back to their respective homes. The mood in town was tense, with Graves supporters glaring at them while others, a surprising number, nodded in quiet support or whispered words of encouragement as they passed. "What happens now?" Delilah asked Owen as he walked her back to the boarding house. "Nathaniel will be free as soon as his father pays his bail." "But not in Lewiston," Owen reminded her. "The judge's conditions ensure he'll have to leave the county, and his trial in Helena will be beyond Gerald's immediate influence." He glanced at her, concern evident in his eyes. "The question is what you'll do now. Mrs. Patterson's shop has suffered because of your involvement in this case." Delilah sighed, acknowledging the painful truth. "I know. I'll speak with her tomorrow, but I expect I'll need to find employment elsewhere." She attempted a brave smile. "Perhaps it's time for a fresh start somewhere new." Owen was silent for several steps before speaking again, his voice low and intense. "I meant what I said that first night, Delilah. What happened to you, what Nathaniel did, it won't happen again. Not while I'm here." "Are you asking me to stay in Lewiston?" she asked softly. He stopped walking and turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "I'm asking you to consider it. The town needs people like you, people with the courage to stand for what's right, no matter the cost." He hesitated, then added more quietly, and I find myself hoping you might stay for other reasons as well." Delilah's heart quickened at the look in his eyes. "What other reasons might those be, Marshal Xavier?" "I think you know," he replied, his voice dropping even lower as he stepped closer. "I've never met anyone like you, Delilah Hayes. Your courage, your compassion, your determination, they humble me." He released one of her hands to gently touch her cheek. "These past weeks, working together, facing danger together, they've shown me what kind of person you are. And I find myself wanting more time to discover everything else there is to know about you." Delilah felt warmth spreading through her at his words and the tenderness in his touch. "I believe I'd like that too," she admitted. "Though staying in Lewiston won't be easy, not after challenging the Graves family so publicly." "Few worthwhile things are easy," Owen replied with a small smile. "But I promise you won't face the challenges alone." Looking up into his eyes, Delilah made her decision. "Then I'll stay at least until we see justice fully served at Nathaniel's trial." Owen's smile deepened. "That's all I ask. For now." In the weeks that followed, Lewiston began a slow transformation. With Nathaniel gone, and the judge's ruling demonstrating that even the Graves family wasn't above the law, people who had long been intimidated into silence found their voices. Other women came forward with stories of mistreatment at Nathaniel's hands. Business owners began to resist Gerald's attempts to control the town's commerce through threats and favoritism. To Delilah's surprise, Mrs. Patterson welcomed her back to the shop with open arms. "You did what was right," the older woman told her. "I may have been afraid, but I'm proud to have you working with me." Gradually, customers returned to the dress shop, including some who had never patronized it before but wanted to show their support for Delilah's courage. The broken window and painted slur became a symbol not of intimidation, but of resistance, a reminder that the town was slowly reclaiming its dignity. Throughout it all, Owen remained a steady presence in Delilah's life. Their work together on the case against Nathaniel evolved into evening walks, Sunday dinners, and quiet conversations that deepened their understanding of each other. By the time they traveled to Helena for Nathaniel's trial a month later, few in town were surprised to see them together. The trial itself lasted a week, with testimony from not only Delilah, Sarah, and Mary, but 6 additional women who had come forward after the initial hearing. Despite Gerald Graves' attempts to influence the proceedings through his connections, the evidence was overwhelming. Nathaniel was convicted on multiple counts and sentenced to 5 years in territorial prison. As Delilah and Owen left the courthouse after the verdict, she felt as though a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "It's over," she said, relief evident in her voice. "He can't hurt anyone else, at least for a while." Owen nodded, taking her hand in his as they walked through Helena's busy streets. "Justice was served, thanks in large part to your courage." They had been invited to dine that evening with Judge Harrington, who had presided over both the initial hearing and the trial. As they approached the restaurant where they were to meet him, Owen suddenly slowed his pace. "Delilah," he said, an unusual note of nervousness in his voice, "before we join the judge, there's something I need to ask you." She turned to him, curious about his sudden change in demeanor. "What is it?" Owen drew a deep breath, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "I had planned to do this back in Lewiston, perhaps by the creek where we've walked so often these past weeks. But standing here, after witnessing justice prevail against all odds, it feels right to ask now." He opened the box to reveal a simple but elegant gold ring set with a small sapphire. "Delilah Hayes, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Delilah stared at the ring, then at Owen's face, earnest, hopeful, and more vulnerable than she had ever seen it. The man who had first stepped from the shadows to protect her, who had promised it would never happen again, was now offering a lifetime of that same protection, wrapped in love and partnership. "Yes," she whispered, her voice strong despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "Yes, Owen Xavier, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into an embrace, Delilah reflected on the strange, winding path that had led her to this moment. What had begun in violence and fear had transformed into something beautiful and enduring. The promise Owen had made that first night that she would never again suffer at the hands of a man like Nathaniel Graves had evolved into a deeper promise of shared life, mutual respect, and abiding love. 6 months later, Delilah and Owen were married in Lewiston's church, with Pastor Miller officiating and seemingly the entire town in attendance. Mrs. Patterson had insisted on creating Delilah's wedding dress herself, a gesture of love that brought tears to Delilah's eyes. Sarah and Mary stood as her attendants, their friendship forged in shared trauma but sustained by mutual respect and affection. Gerald Graves had left Lewiston shortly after his son's conviction, moving to his other properties in Wyoming and gradually relinquishing his grip on the town. Without his oppressive influence, Lewiston began to flourish, attracting new businesses and residents who appreciated the fair application of law that Owen maintained. On their wedding night, as Owen carried her across the threshold of the small house they had purchased on the edge of town, Delilah reflected on how far they had come from that violent encounter behind the general store. "What are you thinking about, Mrs. Xavier?" Owen asked, setting her gently on her feet in their new home. "About promises kept," she replied, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. "And about how sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead us to the best if we have the courage to keep moving forward." Owen's eyes softened as he drew her into his arms. "I intend to keep every promise I make to you, Delilah Xavier, beginning with the first one that no one will ever hurt you again while I draw breath." "I know," she whispered, rising on tiptoes to press her lips to his. "And I promise to stand beside you, through whatever challenges we face, with the same courage and conviction that brought us together." As their lips met in a tender kiss that quickly deepened with passion, Delilah knew with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged in the arms of a man whose commitment to justice had saved her life, and whose love had helped her rebuild it into something more beautiful than she could have imagined. In the years that followed, Delilah and Owen became pillars of the Lewiston community. The dress shop flourished under Delilah's management after Mrs. Patterson retired, expanding to include a small millinery department that attracted customers from throughout the county. Owen continued as marshal, his fair but firm enforcement of the law earning him respect that extended far beyond the town's boundaries. Their first child, a daughter named Elizabeth after Owen's mother, arrived a year after their wedding, followed 2 years later by a son they called James in honor of Delilah's father. Their home became known as a place of warmth and welcome, not only for their growing family but for anyone in need of compassion or assistance. Sarah eventually married Jacob Carson's foreman and moved to North Star Ranch, while Mary opened a small school in Lewiston with Delilah and Owen's support. The wounds inflicted by Nathaniel Graves gradually healed, though none of the women ever forgot what they had endured or the courage it had taken to stand against him. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their home watching their children play in the yard with the family dog, Delilah leaned against Owen's shoulder with a contented sigh. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been if you hadn't intervened that night?" she asked. Owen's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Sometimes. But then I remember that some things are meant to be, regardless of the path that leads to them. He pressed a kiss to her temple. I believe we would have found each other somehow, even if the circumstances had been different. Delilah smiled, turning her face up to his. Such a romantic notion from my practical lawman. You've had that effect on me, he admitted with a chuckle, among many others. As the setting sun painted the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson, Delilah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment of perfect contentment. From terror and pain had come strength and love, from injustice, a commitment to fairness that had transformed not only their lives but their entire community. "I love you, Owen Xavier," she said softly. "Thank you for keeping your promise." "Which one?" he asked, his eyes crinkling with the smile that still made her heart skip after all these years. "All of them," she replied, "but especially the first, that what happened to me would never happen again. You've created a town where women can walk without fear, where justice isn't determined by wealth or power." "We created it together," he corrected gently. "Your courage started something that reached far beyond just our lives." As their children's laughter filled the evening air and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Delilah and Owen Xavier sat wrapped in each other's arms, secure in the knowledge that some promises, once made and kept, could change not just two lives but an entire world.